on 9/11, I was actually on vacation in Las Vegas with some friends where I go quite frequently and now have a second home. And I was there enjoying some time, and I was actually scheduled to fly back to Newark from Vegas on the day, on 9/11. So it was probably around, I want to say 5 a.m. Pacific time, and I was sharing a hotel room in the Flamingo in Vegas with my cousin, and the phone rang. And I remember, like, who is calling at this ungodly early hour of 5 a.m. and just kind of stumbled over and picked up the phone, and it was my what is now my wife, and what at the time was my girlfriend. And she said to me, turn on the TV. And I said, it's 5 o'clock in the morning here. What do you mean turn on the TV? She said, well, you've got to see what's going on. Turn on the TV. So I stumbled, I reached for the nightstand and grabbed the remote and hit the power on the TV, and the TV powered up. And I saw, at that point, I believe maybe the first building of the World Trade Center was hit. And like everybody, I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if it had been an accident. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I quickly, jumped up out of bed and woke up my cousin and started channel surfing, and like everybody, trying to figure out as much as I could about what was really happening. And then when the second plane hit and the rest of the attack continued, I got to be honest with you, one of the first things I did when it came to the reality that this was a terrorist attack and we were having these landmarks and these heavily populated areas being attacked, was I went to the curtains. I'll never forget this. And I went to the curtains, and here I am staying on the Las Vegas Strip. And I pulled the curtain and I looked up, because I started thinking to myself, wait a minute, if they're dropping planes all over the country, or in densely populated areas, or areas that had great significance, I had this horrible feeling that they might be dropping a plane on the Strip. I mean, what a target, the Las Vegas Strip. So I just, I wanted to look out the window to see if anything was happening locally in Vegas and what have you. And fortunately and thankfully, obviously it didn't. And then from there, it just became a really crazy haze, because I, at the time, was doing my radio show on radio station that's no longer on the air in New York City, WNEW. And I was trying to call the station to get some information, because I was supposed to be on the air. Then later that night, I think, because I was scheduled to fly back. And I still hadn't really processed the enormity of what was going on. And I remember talking to the program director at the time and said, look, I don't think I'm going to be able to get back there immediately. And I'm certainly not making my flight or anything. And he said, don't worry about it. He said, don't worry about it when you come back. He said, because we're about to transition to all news, rock station it was. And he said, we're going to just be taking the feed from our sister station, which is all news. And he said, you wouldn't have been on anyway, so there's nothing to cover here. Don't worry about it. Figure out how you're getting back. So very, very strange, as you can imagine, and bizarre place to be. The party good time capital of the country, where everyone, the most transient city, where people are there and in and out of there every day more than any other city. And so many people are there to party and gamble and have fun and do whatever they do. And here I am, just in utterly distraught, and trying as best I can to find out back home if everyone's okay. My coworkers, my friends, my many friends that live in New York City. I live and always have lived about 35, 40 miles out of New York City, New Jersey. But everybody, I was just trying to get information and whose phones were working and what wasn't. And it was just crazy. And then that juxtaposed up against the fact that here I am in Vegas, and honestly, there were a lot of people that were walking around like zombies like me that couldn't believe what had happened. But there were also, if I'm being honest, there were people that they weren't going to let their vacation be derailed, and they were still yelling at craps tables. And I had a really hard time with that. I remember just, that really bothering me, that I was just, wait, how is anybody possibly going around about with their vacation or their life when this has just happened? But, whether, I don't know, I can't explain that. I mean, but it's just something that really resonated with me. And then that night, the Vegas Strip was, all the signs that are always illuminated with whatever entertainment and restaurants and whatever they're advertising had all gone to, I believe, just the American flag, which was surreal. And then the other really big thing that I remember is people that know Vegas well. McCarran Airport, their airport is very close to where the Strip is. And if you've walked the Strip or you've looked out of your hotel and you look up, there's more people going in and out of Vegas than anywhere, and there's constantly planes coming in and out. And that night, it was not a plane in sight. There was, obviously, all air traffic was shut down. So to see no planes and nothing happening at the airport, and the Strip just completely changed. And a lot of people very affected, obviously. But like I said, what jumps out at me is there were still people that weren't. There were people that were not letting anything stop their good time. And then the process began of like, okay, I'm supposed to be out of my hotel room tonight. Like, this was checkout day and I'm supposed to be going back to New Jersey. What happens? Like, can I stay in the room? Can I extend? I don't know when I'm going to get back. You couldn't get to the airlines. Did you even want to fly if you could get a flight? So it was a lot of confusion. And we ended up talking to the hotel. And I remember at the time, I was doubling up with my group that I was there. And we realized that we may be there for a while. And we, just to save money, decided to quadruple up. I think we had like 6 guys. So we might have done like 3 and 3 just to kill one of the rooms so that because we didn't know how long we were going to be there. And we ended up being there I was there for an extra 8 days before I got back. It was a long time before we could get out of there. So it was good that we went into this mode where we're just trying to save a little overhead. And the hotels were willing to let us stay because, remember, nobody was coming in and nobody was leaving. So there was no turnover. Anybody that was supposed to be coming in isn't coming in. And we tried to get back sooner. I remember the other really surreal thing was the idea of like, okay, let's rent a car. Now, obviously, Vegas to New Jersey is a pretty long ride, but we got to do it. And some of the guys in my group were not feeling getting on a plane ever at that point. So we started looking for rental cars. Impossible, not one to be found, because everybody had the same idea. And there were people that said, not only could you not get a rental car, but you could not buy a car. The car dealerships that were in and around Las Vegas, a lot of people go to Vegas that have a lot of disposable income, obviously, and they were buying they bought the car dealerships out. Like there were people that, whether they had money to do it and didn't care, or they just had no plans of getting on a plane anytime soon, and that was not an option to get back home. They were buying cars. The cars were certainly used cars, especially, that were cheaper. We didn't look to do that, but we had heard that from a lot of people, that not only can you not rent one, you can't buy one. So we just knew we had to ride it out, and we did. And I did the best I could to get as much information from back home as I could. And then eventually it got around to the airline saying, we can get you out on this day. And we ended up, getting back home. But it was a really helpless feeling, Shelley, because for me, being a guy from the area and my family was there and everybody was there, I felt really helpless, because I was like, I have so many friends that are cops and firefighters and EMT workers, and the hours that I was on, which was always late at night or overnight, those were the vast majority of people that were my listeners, and they were working, and they were there working at the site. And I just felt so helpless. It's like, I want to do something. I want to try to help, And here I am almost 3,000 miles away, and there's nothing I can do, and I can't even get back home. But once I heard that everybody in my family and most of my friends were thankfully okay, there was nothing I could do but to provide any support over the phone and hope for the best until I could get back.
How was it flying 8 days after 9/11? Were you scared? What was going through your mind, and what was it like at the airport?
Yeah, I would be lying if I said I wasn't certainly apprehensive and scared. And I fly constantly. I did then, and I still do now in normal times, of course. I mean, for my current radio show, I go to LA once a month, so I'm constantly doing those long flights. So flying was, although it's not something I love doing, I always have done, but that was without a doubt the weirdest time to get on a plane. And yeah, I was jittery, I was nervous, but I knew at that point, God forbid, the odds of something happening again like that, it's kind of like getting hit by lightning or something. I mean, this can't happen again. They've got to have this buttoned up. And I really had no choice. If I was going to get home, how to suck it up and do it. I mean, there was no other alternative. There aren't trains from Las Vegas. There's nothing. So, barring getting a car and driving for 3 or 4 days, I had no choice. So I did it. And the people in my group, my cousin who I was traveling with, he was really nervous. I remember he was really like shaky about it, and it just reached the point where like we got to do it. And we all did. My cousin and I believe, got out on the same flight, but some of the other guys in our group, I think, had to go stay an extra day. I mean, it was very hard to get flights and get out of there. And, the airports were obviously, you saw enhanced security and everything. And it was just surreal. But I remember just getting on the plane and, getting home. And then I remember talking to some of my friends who had been to people. When I say friends, I have friends that were police officers at the time. They're retired now, but police officers, and them telling me some of the stories and telling me what was going on. And then eventually, the radio station reverted back to the regular format, and then started doing, going into New York City for the first time since it happened, is also a memory that I absolutely recall.
Now, tell us about New York Steel. You and then future Hall of Famer Mike Piazza organized a heavy metal fundraiser that raised close to $100,000 for an organization that already existed to help the widows and children of firefighters and New York City police officers who lost their lives in the line of duty. How did that all come about? How did you think of this? And just tell us.
Well, people that know me know that I have been my whole life, my whole career, a huge fan of hard rock music and a supporter and flag waver for it. And one of the things, I mean, at that time on WNEW, I was doing a week, twice a week at that time. Twice or one, I don't know if I had gone to 2 days a week, but definitely my big show was a Saturday night hard rock show that was called Saturday Night Rocks, and it was on Saturday nights 10 to midnight, or 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And it was extremely popular with the hard rock crowd and the artists, and a lot of my audience were police officers, firefighters, EMT workers. It was amazing how many of those people were fans of that show. And I knew that because pre 9/11, we all know that security in the buildings in New York was way different than it was post, and it was a lot more loose. So it was completely normal in the course of my radio show, which had become, that weekly show had become this free for all of people, like you never know who was dropping in or popping in or hanging out. And it was extremely normal for cops, firefighters, EMT workers, unannounced, to walk into my studio and ask me to play songs for them. It happened all the time. And some of those officers ended up becoming friends and would come up every week. And even if I didn't acknowledge they were there, because a lot of times they were on the job and they weren't supposed to be hanging out. So they would be like, no, we just want to say hi and hang out, but don't say that we're here. Because a lot of times I'd give their precinct a shout out or something. So they would, I just felt such a connection to those folks, and I knew what they were going through, and I knew what a segment of them, at least, what a big fan and supporter of what I was doing they were. So one of the things that happened that really bothered me at the time was in the wake of 9/11, one of the radio ownership groups, I don't remember which one it was, put out a list of songs that they felt shouldn't be played in the wake of 9/11 because they felt that it would create some, so there's some sensitivities to it or something because of what had just happened and it wasn't appropriate. And I saw this list and I honestly, I thought it was ridiculous. And I've always felt that music, for people who love whatever music and kind of music they love, it's a healing thing. It brings them into, it makes them feel good. It makes them forget about their problems, and it's an escape. And I'm like, what? Like, why? How is one person deciding what's right for somebody to want to hear at this time? This makes no sense to me. So I didn't adhere to it, of course. And again, at the end of the day, I still thought and still do think it was a really, really silly thing. But I saw this trend that I've seen happen so many times with this music that I love, where it was somehow, some of it was being like not blamed, but targeted as being inflammatory. I'm like, what is anyone talking about here? So there was that. And then the big event happened at Madison Square Garden with Billy Joel and all that, which of course is wonderful, and amazing artists and amazing cause and incredibly impactful. Nobody would argue that. But being a guy that is dyed in the wool hard rock guy and always sort of fights for that music to have a seat at the table, I was really bummed, as were a lot of my audience, that there was no inclusion for hard rock in that event, that there wasn't any hard rock artist represented. And all due respect to the artists that played it, because again, they're legendary, amazing artists. We get that. But there's this whole world out there that loves the energy and aggression and the release of hard rock. And that was not being welcome. And I had heard some stories that a couple of those bands had approached those promoters and they were turned away, saying that their music wouldn't have been appropriate or something for that event. And that sort of stuff just makes me crazy, because I've always hated the cliches that come with heavy metal. I don't adhere to them. I mean, I don't begrudge anybody for how they look or want to behave, but as you can see, I've never looked like a metal guy, but it's in my blood. It's what I love. So there's a lot of people that love this music that people don't realize do, because they don't wear what I call the uniform. They don't have the tattoos, the hair, the earrings, whatever. And one of the guys that loved that music, we had become great friends at that time, and we still are, is Mike Piazza, who was playing for the Mets. And Mike and I became friends because he was listening to my radio show as well. And he's a huge hard rock fan. And he started coming in. He ended up becoming one of those people that I talked about that literally just came and sat down and guest DJ'd with me. It happened constantly. He would finish a game at Shea Stadium and drive to the studio and sit in with me. And I actually used to call him my co-host because he came on that frequently, and we became great, great friends. And we were talking about it a little bit. And I said, I want to find a way to do an event for the hard rock community. I think it's deserved. I think it's needed. I think people would love it. And I want to find a way to do that. So he encouraged me. I mean, really, his only role at that point was encouraging me to say, yeah, you should do it. That would be really cool. And I remember I said to him, if I do it, I want you to host it with me. He's like, yeah, I'll do it. He goes, I would absolutely, love to do that. So, okay, I had a co-host, but I had nothing else. And then I reached out to the Hammerstein Ballroom, the folks that ran that at the time. And at the time, that was run by a company called Metropolitan, which was owned by John Scher, the legendary concert promoter. And John's office was running Hammerstein at that time. And not long before this, they had asked, the building had just opened, and it just opened as Hammerstein Ballroom. And they had this event to show it off to everybody. And I went to the event. And I remember a guy by the name of Mark Schulman, who was booking the shows there, saying to me, hey, if you ever have any cool ideas for cool events that you want to do here, let me know, because we're controlling the building and we could do some great stuff. And there was also a woman that was working for them at the time named Kathy Sharnico, and she was in the promotions department. These folks both, last I know, work for AEG now, but back then they were working for John Scher, who again is legendary local promoter. And I took it to Mark and I said, hey, Mark, I'd like to do this idea for a benefit. And I want to do something for, for the hard rock community that was left out of this. And he said, what are you thinking? And I said, well, I'm thinking that I want to keep it to all locally based artists, because the idea, Shelley, I've seen, and I'm sure you have in your career too, there's a lot of people with good intentions that put on benefits, but they don't ever really ever make any money. Because even if people are playing for free, they want their hotels covered, they want their air covered. Big name artists aren't going to fly coach. They're not going to, the overhead becomes so big that at the end of the day, it's a wash. So I said to Mark, I said, I want to stay with people that are local, that we don't need to deal with hotels and air, because then it's going to destroy whatever money we could make. He said, well, what do you have? And at that point, I put together a list of local metal artists that were really big on my show that I thought would do it. And the list I had was Anthrax, Overkill, Ace Frehley, who was from Kiss, who was a longtime friend of mine and still is. And I worked with him. I actually signed him to his solo deal when I worked for a label. So I had a great relationship with all these artists. And originally Skid Row, who were all living in New Jersey at the time, and I was going to try to reunite them with Sebastian Bach, and I thought that would have been a big moment. For whatever reason, Skid Row couldn't do it, and I ended up getting Sebastian solo, because at that time he was doing Rocky Horror on Broadway. So Sebastian was in, Anthrax was in, Overkill was in, Ace Frehley was in. And Ace would have been my headliner. And I took it to Mark, and Mark said, in normal times, this would be a slam dunk, but we're not in normal times. You're talking about wanting to do something a couple months out of 9/11, where this city's far from healed, and there's still a ton of people that don't want to come to New York City. He said, you need another band to fill the building, which I think is like 3,500 capacity. He said, you need something people haven't seen in a while. You need a real hook at the top. And I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, only because of the time it is, you're really going to need a hook to get people into New York right now. So then I got thinking, and all the guys in Twisted Sister had been coming into my show over the course of the time that I've been doing it, all individually. JJ would come in and he'd be promoting whatever reissue. D would come in and he would be promoting solo record or whatever thing he was working on. Eddie, Mark, AJ, all would come in individually, whatever drama and issues existed, but obviously another quintessential New York area band. And I started thinking, you know what? Maybe this is the thing. So I called JJ, who a lot of people look at D as the guy of Twisted Sister. He's the face, the front man. We all know that. But what people don't know is JJ actually owns the name of the band, and he actually controls the band. He's the actual original member. So I called JJ and I told him what was going on. And I said, hey, I would like to see if you guys would pull together and do this. You're a New York band. It's a great cause. It's important. And if anything's going to get you all to bury the hatchet, this should be it. And he agreed. And he said, that's, you're right. And that's, I'm going to see if I can take it to the guys and see if they'll do it. So he said, give me a day or two. He calls me back, said, I talked to everybody, we're in. He said, we haven't played in 13 years. We're going to suck it up. We're not going to come out in costumes and makeup. We just don't think that's right. I said, I don't care what you come out as. And he said, we'll rent a studio. We'll rehearse for a couple of days. We'll come up with an hour. We'll come, we'll play it. We'll go our own ways. That's our agreement amongst us. We're going to suck it up for this cause because we believe in it, believe in what you're doing. We'll do it. And that's it. So I said, wonderful. This is amazing. So I go back to Mark. I said, what would you think about Twisted Sister, first time in 13 years headlining? He said, you got a show. We had a show. And that's where it went from there. And then, JJ could tell you the stories about them rehearsing to pull it together, because there was still underlying tensions in that band. There's always some tension with those guys. And JJ told the story about, I think, Mark Mendoza showing up to the rehearsal and putting a gun on the top of his amp and saying, anybody gets out of line, I'm walking out of here. Like real crazy tension, intimidation stuff. But they all pulled it together. They were great. And that event, when they got done playing, where they swore it was going to be one and done and you're never going to see us again, ended up relaunching the band for about 15 years of playing huge festivals all over the world. But it all started with that. And no matter, even if you're doing a benefit show, you're still going to deal with drama and politics and ego. And I am not a concert promoter. And there's a reason why that's the last 20 years ago was the last event I personally put together and did like that, because it's a lot. No matter what, it's a lot. We had a problem with Anthrax, not because of anything the guys did, but because of their name. Because remember, at that time, terrorist attack, anthrax is a chemical agent that kills people. And people thought that anthrax on this bill was insensitive because of their name. And there was a push to get them to change their name at that time. And if you look at photos from Anthrax's performance that night, they came out on stage all wearing jumpsuits, all with a different word on the white jumpsuit. And it said, we're not changing our name. And they stood across the lip of the stage and assembled that sign. And then they took the jumpsuits off and played. The crowd loved it. I mean, they went nuts. It was just a statement that, like, our music is our music. We do it the way we do it, and we're going to do it the way we want to do it. And I remember I got a little blowback from Ace, because Ace, in its original incarnation, Ace was going to be the headliner. And Ace was like, what are you talking about? I'm a founding member of KISS. I'm going to play New York Groove. How is that not enough? What? And I'm like, Ace, it's just the time we're in. He's like, well, Twisted Sisters, I'm opening for Twisted Sister. I'm like, no, you'll be right before them, but they haven't played in 13 years. And I basically just had to talk everybody into taking one for the team. Just fall in line, please, for the bigger reason, which was the cause. Sebastian was easy, because since he was doing Rocky Horror, he had to be on stage at 8. So we started the show at like 6:45. So he did a half an hour and he was out the door. And then at the end of the night, he came back and sang, we're not going to take it with Twisted Sister. And Mike hosted it with me. And it's one of the things in my career that I'm the most proud of having put together because of the cause. We raised about $100,000, and it was, in the big picture, that's not a tremendous amount of money, but the cause for it, the reason it went right to the police and widows and orphans, police and firefighters, widows and orphans fund, which I forget who picked that charity. We had done some research and we thought that would be the best way to go. And we all felt good about what we did. We had a little party that the Hard Rock threw for us afterwards on 57th. And we kind of celebrated the evening, and nobody made a penny. Nobody took a penny. And every bit of proceeds we gave to that fund, and we sold it out. And it was, again, a night that I'm incredibly proud of.
And you should be. I
Oh,
mean,
thanks.
on so many levels, Eddie. That was such an awesome idea. And I spoke with Dee Snider very recently, and he told me that they were turned down. MTV told them, no, not appropriate, too hard, and it was crazy. It was
Yeah,
just
I
crazy.
just don't understand that mentality. I mean, no matter what kind of music you're into, music is subjective. It's your personal taste. I mean, if that's what is making you feel better, and that's what heals you, and that's what gives you your escape, who's to tell somebody that that is or isn't appropriate? I mean, it's just nuts to me. But yeah, I mean, and it's funny because I didn't find out until two a little bit after the event, but for the longest time, Dee didn't even really know the whole backstory. JJ did, because I dealt with JJ almost exclusively on it. And JJ, Dee knew that I was the catalyst to promote it and bring it together, but I don't think he knew the whole thing, because I didn't deal with Dee. It was JJ the whole time. And it's funny because JJ just recently started a podcast, and he contacted me and he said, I want to have you on because we're going to come up on 20 years on this at the end of the year. He said, and look, you're the reason why Twisted Sister had a whole second run, uh, which is wonderful, but that wasn't the thought process at all at the time. And it's crazy because Twisted Sister, which I didn't even know, because I was a little too young to see Twisted Sister in their club days, glory days in the New York, New Jersey area, which are legendary. But I didn't realize that they were so big in Europe and other parts of the world. They are a way, way bigger band outside of America than in America. So when he told me, hey, we got some offers because people had heard they played that show, we may do them. I'm like, well, that's great. Where are they? And he was telling me, like, Germany, Romania, Belgium, all the. I said, you're going to go over there to play to 1,000 people? He goes, no, we're headline. They're offering headline festivals. And he would send me the pictures and videos. And I was like, what? So it was, I'm equally proud that I could have played a small role in getting them back together again, and them having that whole super successful second phase of their career.
Is there anything else you want to add, Eddie?
No, not really. I mean, I'm just incredibly grateful still for all the bands that played. To this day, all of them are friends. To this day, I'm still great friends with Mike Piazza. I mean, it shouldn't be understated Mike's role in this, because even though he had nothing to do with the planning of it, his name carried a ton of weight, especially at that time. He was a superstar on the Mets. And just people looking at that flyer and that ad mat and seeing his name on there, it's like, what? Because for people that don't, or younger, or not a baseball fan, I mean, Mike was a massively big name at that time playing for the Mets. So that brought a lot of clout to it. And I think that was a really valuable thing. And he was right there with me. I mean, Mike likes to bust my chops about a lot of things. I mean, a really quick, funny story is Mike encouraged me to make a shirt. And we made an event shirt, which sold out really, really quickly. I think I have one somewhere. And Mike said to me, you should make shirts for your radio show and sell them. And I said to him, I go, Mike's nobody's going to want a shirt for my radio show, especially when there's an event shirt with all the bands on it. Nobody's going to want this event, my radio show shirt. He's like, dude, you sell like 3,000 of them, man. He goes, there's going to be 3,500 people there. Everyone's going to want one. Come on, man. You make this thing. I go, Mike, really? So he talked me into making up shirts for my show at the time. And all the other bands had merch around the event shirt. And I ended up like making, I don't know, maybe like 2,500 shirts. Like I stepped out and put a lot of money up to buy these shirts. And the end of the night comes and we're all getting ready to go over to the party. And Mike goes to me, how'd you do on the shirts? And I said, oh my God, I forgot there were shirts out there at merch. And I was in Mike's car. He had an SUV. And I said, pull up to the front of I got to see if they sold them, take back what they didn't sell. So he pulls up to the front of the Hammerstein Ballroom. I jump out of the SUV and I go up to the guy. He's breaking down the merch thing. And I said, hey, I wanted to grab whatever's left of the shirts that didn't sell and make sure the money's allotted for. And he goes, oh, your shirts? I said, yeah. He goes, they're right over there. And I swear, Shelly, the boxes were as high as when I first left them. I don't think I sold 3 out of like 3,000. So I go out to I'll never forget, I go out to the street and Mike's got his flashers on. He's waiting for me. He's like, let's go. And I go, come here. It's like, what's up? I go, come in here. He walks in the lobby of the Hammerstein. I go, see all those boxes? I said, you're helping me put them in your car. And Mike and I are carrying out these boxes of shirts. I'll never forget, his brother was in the back seat. We had so many boxes that his brother was crouched up with boxes falling on him as Mike and I loaded these unsold shirts. So to this day, he breaks my chops about that. But that's just a funny story that that jumps out that I think about that night of he and I in the middle of the night loading shirts out at Hammerstein. And I'm going, I told you nobody was going to want this shirt. But again, it's a great memory. You know, Twisted Sister is no longer, they don't play anymore. And I spoke to Dee recently, and Dee said something. Somebody asked Dee on my current radio show if they would ever play again. And Dee said, the only way I would ever do it is if it was a 20-year reunion for New York Steel and Eddie put a show together again. And I'm like, oh my God. So now people are starting to hit me with like, you got to do it, man. And as much as I would love to, I'll see. I mean, we're still up against the question mark of the pandemic and where we're going to be towards the end of the year. But you never say never. Who knows? And if I did it, I think the cause is still valid. I would still want it to be a charity event for a worthy charity like that.
Okay. I thank you, Eddie Trunk.
Thank you, Shelley. Great to see you.